The renunciate tradition in India is very old, but historians tell us that it gained considerable momentum in the 2nd and 3rd centuries BC. At that time, many Hindus left temples and towns for mountain caves and forests, preferring to take an inward contemplative way to spiritual fulfillment while in isolation. For them, the temple fire rituals were replaced by the sacrifice of the ego self on the fire altar of the heart. However, there always remained a close connection between the lone ascetic in the cave and the temple priest who stayed in the midst of the community and acted for the community. In fact, in one of the caves of Arunachala, there is evidence carved in stone of the link which existed between the cave and temple. For the carvings of its pillars and its mural band of animal heads, which have been dated to the 10th century by a French scholar, are exactly similar and are hence contemporary to those carved on the original temple in the big temple complex below. Thus, with intent, the temple is in the cave, the symbol of the one, whilst the cave, symbolized by the dark, imageless space of the innermost shrine, is in the temple, which represents the community of all beings. All are in the one, and the one is in the all, yet beyond all. Those who know this are rightly called seers, for they see the fundamental oneness of the whole of existence. For them, no more irreconcilable contraries exist, such as inner and outer reality, or transcendence and immanence, seclusion and society, and even guru and devotee. As the Maharshi once said, in reality, there are no others to be helped. In the evening, after leaving the ashram, we usually went for a walk around the hill. It was only rarely that we made the entire Giri Pradakshina or circumambulation of the hill along the 13-kilometer encircling road. It is traditionally performed following the movement of the planets around the unmoving sun, which means keeping the hill always at one's right. The 8 cardinal points are marked by shrines, tanks, and mandapams, for those edifices date from an earlier medieval period when Vaishnava faith was in the ascendant over the Shiva faith. And the hill was then regarded as the wheel of time in the hands of Mahavishnu, the Lord of the Sun. Years later, I was talking to some French people who had just visited Tiruvannamalai, and they asked me what I had seen when performing the Pradakshina, as they were afraid they might have missed something. I told them that as the Maharshi had advised the devotees, we did not make the circuit in an outward-looking way, but walk very slowly, trying to keep our minds on the self, which is the inner Arunachala. Early devotees like B.V. Narasimhaswamy tell us that until 1926, the Maharshi made the Pradakshina of the hill several times a year, accompanied by a group of his devotees. He would take the whole night to complete the circuit, sometimes longer, for he walked most of the way in the deeply absorbed state of samadhi. When recalling the happiness and pleasure they felt when making the Pradakshina, the Maharshi especially mentioned, he said that the usual constraints of time were avoided, for they started when they felt like it, stopped when they were tired, cooked and ate when they were hungry. Since there was no compulsion to reach a particular place at a particular time, no anxiety or preoccupation came to mar their concentration. And with concentration came blissful absorption in the timeless self. Thus, it is possible to be liberated from time even as one treads the wheel of time. There were many moments and monuments of religious and historical interest in Tiruvannamalai, and my mother liked to show them to me. I remember particularly the hollow stone sphinxes along the Pradakshina road, each standing next to its purificatory tank. These sphinxes appear to have as a head of a lion, but in fact they have the same countenance as the great faces of glory situated at the summit of the temple. These, as Stella Cromrich points out, are composed of 3 faces, the face of man, the face of the lion representing the sun or supreme spirit, and the face of the dragon, who, as the destroyer of the universe, stands for transcendental wisdom. All three are superimposed on and hence overwhelm the just discernible death's head underlying them. Today, these enigmatic sphinxes are used as mere shrines at which pilgrims, after taking a bath in the tank, make their offerings to Arunachala. But did they have a more important function in the past? For their symbology suggested that in a long forgotten rite, they may have been gateways to the sun, places of initiation where the neophytes, after being cleansed of sin and animal nature, received the highest knowledge that led to immortality in the sun. The area surrounding the hill is like a palimpsest, for besides the Vaishnava and Shiva monuments, much older forms of worship survive, such as the cult of fertility trees. To this day, women who wish for a child go to such a tree, usually a numba tree, and tie to its branches a strip of cloth in the shape of a cradle, much as in the ancient Celtic practice. Nearby, there is usually a small stone chamber or dolmen through whose narrow central channel the women pass in a reenactment of birth, yet another way of awakening the life-giving force of the great mother of all beings. The vegetation of the forest offers little more than prickly pears, wood apples, bark, and leaves for the sustenance of life, so it is surprising that sadhus managed to live there. We knew a venerable old ascetic called Shiva who lived alone in the forest off the Chengam road. Some of his visitors had built him a stone platform or bench on which he sat in the meditative position. On one of our visits, he instructed me in the age-old yoga of achieving mental concentration by linking the repetition of the sacred syllable Om to the respiration. For my initiation, I had to get down with him in a narrow pit where I sat facing him cross-legged. He smelt, not unpleasantly, of oil and the wild. I cannot tell what benefit I would have derived from the yogic practice which he assured me would bring me liberation within 6 months, since I did not keep it up. Perhaps this was because my faith in him was eroded when he asked us, in my opinion, betraying some envy, why the Maharshi attracted so many people to his ashram, while so few came to see him. And then once when we had brought him a bunch of bananas, he told Suzanne that the next time she came, she should bring him a good warm blanket. With the severity of the young, I was shocked. It was impossible to imagine the Maharshi making such a request. But my mother, more tolerant than myself, brought him the blanket on our next visit. Exploring the dense forest on the northern side of the hill, we made the discovery of a temple which, for some unknown reason, had been abandoned by a man and allowed to fall into ruin. Nature was reasserting itself, and a tree had pushed its way through the domed roof. We stood before the temple for some time, letting our imagination conjure up its deities and rites, but we did not venture in since it was likely to have become a home of snakes and scorpions and other beasts. The light filtered down to us through the foliage of the thick canopy of trees. When we found a place where we could look above it, we saw Arunachala very near, looking much more austere than from any other aspect, and steeply rising to its high, brilliant peak, pointing into the sky. Suzanne's favorite place for meditation was on a spur of Arunachala under the Bodhi tree that faced the Tiruvannamalai tank. The large tank stood before a small shrine and had long stone steps that must have been trodden by crowds of pilgrims. Now we always saw it deserted. It was a lovely spot, especially at sunset when it was bathed in warm colors. There was no sound other than the constant serration of cicadas, the occasional flap of bright wings over the treetops, or a lonely call of a coal. The atmosphere was replete with the spirit of the highest endeavor, since in the Puranic story about the origin of Arunachala, this was where Parvati, the bride of Lord Shiva, performed the last part of her penance to atone for her sin, which can be described as an action unbecoming of who she was. In a moment of play, she had put both her hands over Lord Shiva's eyes, whereupon he had withdrawn into himself in deep trance, thereby depriving her in the world of his sight. Parvati, determined to overcome the separation from her Lord, persevered for eons with her tapas, or austerities of mortification, until she became all dried up and her body was reduced to skin and bones. Artists for centuries have depicted her in a state of extreme emaciation, fondly investing her image with the qualities of sacrifice, devotion, and courage that lend beauty even to those who are most worn by the trials of life. In the end, in her search for means of gaining back her Lord's attention, she came to Tiruvannamalai. She met there the sage Gautama Muni, who taught her how to make her thought of Shiva one-pointed like an arrow. After assiduous practice, her thought was at last able to pierce into his heart. Roused from his self-absorption, Shiva opened his eyes and saw her. To commemorate his return to awareness and love, he reappeared as an infinite pillar of light and fire, thereby granting her the sight of ultimate truth. Knowing now that she had never been separated from her divine Lord because she was inherently one with him, she merged into him as half his being. The pillar of light and fire is still there, we are told, but in the form of the hill of earth and stone called Arunachala, so that ordinary people might see it and be blessed in preparation for the final darshan, the direct perception of its true nature. Suzanne, that is Sujata Sen, liked this story, perhaps because it bore some resemblance to the theme of one of her earliest dances, called the Invocation to Varuna, in which the maiden implores the god of the sky to see her lest she be yielded to death. To be seen by the reigning authority in her life had indeed always been important to Suzanne. Now she wanted to be sure that she had the attention of the Maharshi, and that he would watch over her as masters do, and guide her from ignorance to self-knowledge.